Hello, welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Tiffany Truss, workforce strategist at Associated Black Charities. Thank you all for joining our Equity at Work series. This is our first webinar in the series, Black Voices in Board Service. On behalf of ABC, I'm so excited to be with you all today, yet eager to start the discussion with our moderator and our panel. Before I introduce our moderator, I also want to take the time to thank Digital Harbor Foundation for being ABC's tech partner. Kenny Clash has provided such invaluable tech support for ABC's virtual convenings. Kenny, we could not do this without you. I am esteemed to hand the floor over to Terrill North. He is the Executive Director of Hoffberger Family Philanthropies. As our panel share their board experience, their lessons, and I'd even add at times overlooked assets to board service, I'd like to take the time to highlight that Terrill previously served as the president of the Board of Impact Silver Spring and the vice president of ACLU of Maryland. So again, thank you all for being with us. Thank you, Terrill, for your willingness to share space with us today. Terrill, I'll hand it over to you.
Somebody has to do it at every event, right? So why not me? Get it out the way quickly. Thank you, Tiffany, very much for that warm introduction. So let me introduce our panelists and just get right into it. So let me let you know who's speaking with you today. Tracey Lynette Durant is the board chair of Child First Authority and the Chimes Foundation. She's also the executive director of the Office of Equity, Baltimore City Schools. Dr. Durant has over 20 years of experience in the educational and nonprofit fields, having roles where she has been responsible for leading system-wide initiatives designed to promote utilization of equitable practices, systems, and structures to ensure positive outcomes. Terri Lee Freeman is the executive director of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland and the African American History and Culture. She was previously president of the National Civil Rights. Let me say this, go back. Terri L. Freeman is the executive director of the Reginald Lewis Museum in Maryland, the African American History and Culture Museum. She was previously served as president of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. She has also served as an executive in the philanthropic industry and is currently serving on the boards of Board Source, the Downtown Baltimore Partnership, and Urban Teachers. Last but not least, Lorraine Coleman is the chair of the board of directors of Youth as Resources and a student at Baltimore Polytechnic Institute and a community activist. Youth as Resources is a youth-led grant-making, community organizing, and leadership development organization that helps youth address the most critical community needs and institutional challenges on their own terms. YAR is governed by a majority youth board of directors. So you have a set of very dynamic ladies today who are going to share some information with us. So let's start off with the most basic thing, and I'll go to Terri with this one first. What are boards of directors, and what is their role of a board in a nonprofit?
Well, thank you first off for having me. I appreciate being invited to participate on the panel. Boards are really the foundation of organizations. They serve to provide oversight, if you will, governance, and help develop the strategy for the organization. I think while we often spend a lot of time focused on their governance role, the board has an important role to ensure that the organization remains on mission and that the organization focuses on its purpose and how it is supposed to contribute to the community based on how it has defined itself in its founding documents. And so it is that touchstone, if you will. The board is a touchstone for the organization. And honestly, the board also should serve as a partner to the chief executive of the nonprofit organization.
So Lorraine, what's an ideal board member?
So thank you for that. The ideal board member. So at YAR, we have this leadership training that we give. And one of those slides of the presentation of our leadership training, there we have a word cloud that has 32 words. And those words are characteristics a leader. And so we would have participants choose 3 words that they relate to and, you know, explain why they picked those words. So then after there's a whole thing where we give 7 leadership styles. So it would be visionary, communicator, organizer, motivator, facilitator, controller, and task oriented. And those are the 7. And then finally, to answer the question, who are the ADIL board members and what they should bring to the table? I think an ADIL board member be anyone who chooses at least one of those words on those word cloud and at least 1 leadership styles. And usually in our training, most people pick more than 1 leadership style. So honestly, they bring more to the table because they bring more leadership styles. You know, I don't think we can, I think the more the merrier. So I don't think we can have not enough visionaries or not enough facilitators. So I think like those are the board members, those who have the leadership style and like can be leaders and have, you know, they know the characteristics because they chose the words on the word cloud. And, you know, a visionary, they think long hair. They think.
What are some of those words, by the way?
Visionary, communicative, organizer, motivator. So motivated, let's do motivated. That one's easy. Motivated, they uplift the, you know, the board member. They can uplift the board. And if we're doing a focus group or something like that, they will uplift participants and like have like, you know, they bring like the good energy and like have participate and stuff like that. Like a task oriented, they focus on the task at hand. They focus on the mission. They focus on what us as a board is supposed to do. And like, they help us, you know, like go on the path of what we're supposed to be doing. So those are like a few examples right there.
Cool. So let me start with Tracey on this. Why would, I mean, all of you have things that you're doing all day long. You're all busy. Why boards leadership? Why do this at all?
Well, you know, I think the simplest answer to that is, for me, one, that leadership is very much a decision, not a position, right? And so whenever someone makes the decision or answers the call to serve on a board, the call that you're really answering is to make sure that you are working in the organization in a way that allows us to keep our focus on the mission. I think Terri said this already, you know, in terms of boards do the work, right, that no one else does. And quite frankly, boards do the work that no one else can, because it is in many ways, the people who serve in boards on boards are those individuals who are often the most connected to those that we are trying to serve. And so what board leadership does is it affords each of us an opportunity to be the voice, to stay focused on that vision and mission, to make sure that we are allowing space for other voices that are often unheard, right? Voices that are even not sought. One of the things that I'll tell you in my experience in board leadership, especially sitting, you know, in the body of a Black woman, is that oftentimes a lot of what I was told early on in my board service and my board development was that we just needed to be in the room, right? And then that became, you just need a seat at the table.
Black people just need to be in the room.
Right. And it's like, well, we just happy to have a seat at the table. And for me, I don't want just a seat at the table. I want my voice to matter. And I want it to matter for those who will never be invited into those rooms. And so board leadership is important for that reason.
Terri, Lorraine, do you have anything you'd add to that?
Well, I only thing that I would add, I totally agree with, I'm going to call her Dr. Durant, because anybody who has anybody who has earned that doctor, I make sure that I honor that doctor. You know, this speaks to this whole issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I actually say we need to drop the D, because I think we got the D down pat, frankly. What we
That's
don't
just getting
have
in the
down
room, right?
pat is the inclusion piece, to actually really listen to those voices, nor the equity piece, to make sure that there's a balance around the contribution. So I would agree with how Dr. Durant has discussed the important role of individuals on the board, and also do recognize that sometimes they present the voice of those who aren't heard, but sometimes they don't. And that's why we have to be careful, frankly, on how we as much as we can, if we're in a staff role, our voice sometimes is limited on what we can do around board chaos. But as board members, we can help influence how the board is developed over time.
So why, I mean, you got it up, Dr. Durant, you got at it a little bit, talking about why we need to recruit Black people to do these roles. Can any of you expound a little bit upon why this is particularly valuable? I mean, I think what I've heard is that the voice that's not always in the room. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like Lorraine, representing the youth voice. I mean, that's often not in the room when we're dealing with youth issues. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Of course. So Dr. Durant, she talked about her experience, but Youth as Resources is the first board I've ever been on, and Youth as Resources is a predominantly Black youth board.
Oh.
So I never had that experience where, we're just in the room, like our voice isn't heard. Our voice is heard in Youth as Resources because we're all basically Black. So that's an amazing experience. That my first experience on a board is with a predominantly Black board, and I love that. And to like go on the question, like, why is it important to elevate and recruit Black people and people of color? I think you get more perspectives, and you get more expertise and point of views, and I think that can help broaden the organization. It's like the more people you have, the more openings you can get, like in communities. And you can, like, if you have, just like, don't use us as a token, don't use us as a trophy. And like, as Dr. Durant and Miss Freeman said, like, don't just have our voice not be heard and just yay, we're in the room, but you're not letting us talk. And share our expertise and our perspectives and how we can help broaden the organization as a whole.
I think one of the things I want to add to what Lorraine said, and I think it really is profound that your experience is with, the experience that you've had at Youth as Resources. One of the things, and I think I'm really excited, especially because school is getting ready to open. I work, full time during the day in a school system for Baltimore City Public Schools. And one of the things that we often hear is about this idea of youth voice. And I think it aligns very well to the conversation we're having about nonprofit boards and why service and why recruit, people with certain backgrounds, Black and brown folks to serve on boards. One of the things that I will say is true in education and is true in nonprofit. The people who we are purporting to serve, right? Those that we say we're serving, they are telling us everything we need to know about what we're doing well and what we're not. You see, young people have always been talking to us. If you look at our academic data, if you look at our suspension data, if you look at who's coming to school and who's not, like all of these things are ways that young people are communicating to us about how they are experiencing us. I think the same is true in nonprofit boards. One of the dangers, when I worked at Maryland nonprofits many years ago, I think the number at that time was 28,000 nonprofits in the state of Maryland, right? 28,000 nonprofits. A good percentage of them were serving communities of color, right? A good percentage of them were serving poor communities. But those people were not represented on those boards. Like they were not there. And so how is it possible for me in true leadership, right? In true service to my community to be trying to do a thing without asking the people that I'm trying to do it with, not for, right? Because that's the other thing. Like sometimes, to Terri's earlier point about people, doing stuff, and some people are at the table, some people are not at the table. One of the things that happens a lot, and this speaks to who should be on your board and how do you know who should be on your board? Who are you trying to serve? Because if the people you are trying to serve have zero representation on your board, then you got to ask yourself some questions about what it is that you're actually doing. And I think Youth as Resources is a good model for having the voices of those who we are trying to serve actually helping us to lead the work that we are trying to do.
That's actually really, Terri, can you dig into that a little bit, like offer your reflection on that? Just because part of it is, well, what's the difference? Why does it matter who the board members are if you're trying to help people, right? Why does it matter who the staff is and what they look like if you're trying to help people?
Well,
why does that matter?
Well, no,
because they're all we're doing good work, right?
I mean, So as I'm almost at a loss, honestly, with your question, and I know why you asked it.
Right. And you know, and you live it, right? I don't just give you a second to think about it. This is real life. People who are leading organizations tell us all the time.
Exactly. I am clearly older than your other two panelists and have been involved in this work for a long time. And I want to get back to what Lorraine said, and then I'll get on to what Tracey said. But this whole idea of youth voice used to be one of those things where people would say, okay, well, let's have some youth board members. No, let's have a youth board member, as if one voice would be enough, not to mention how people, especially generational issues, how people often treat younger people when they're the sole voice on the board. And if I were in that position as an only, I think that I'd shrink a little bit as well. So what I used to say to people all the time is you can't have one. You have to have a group that will be able to then work with the rest of the board, whatever generations you got there, to include their voice. And I think the same thing has happened in the past with Black folks, with Latinx communities, with women. I served as the board chair of the Community Foundation when I was in Memphis. And there was a lot of change that had taken place with that Community Foundation, but that is a really, those entities typically are a little patriarchal in their approach. They're philanthropic entities. You're dealing with people who have a lot of resource, and what they think a board should be versus what we know a board should be can be very different. And so it is really important and critical that as you are developing and building boards, I mean, and sometimes you have to do some wholesale change of boards, but it doesn't happen overnight. You have to do it over a period of time. And you have to know, as Dr. Durant is saying, who do you want to serve? And based on who you want to serve, you identify what the board should be. Now, when it comes to staffing, I happen to be a real believer that lived experience has a place in identifying who your staff will be. And I don't think I need to be any more explicit than that because it depends on the organization. But having no lived experience that relates to whatever the mission, the purpose of the organization is. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I do think that it makes things a little bit more difficult and more complicated.
Okay. So let me ask then, how do you recruit Black folks for this? How do you find the staff? I mean, sorry, not staff. How do you find what are the strategies for finding the people that have the time to do this kind of work and make this kind of input?
So, I mean, I'll start with this one. You know, I couldn't be here as part of this webinar and not talk about my board pipeline experience. And so I was in, I don't even know what cycle we're on right now with board pipeline through Associated Black Charities, but I was in the very first cycle of the board pipeline program. And so all of my, you know, even when I was in college, everything I wanted to do was about service. I knew the word, but I didn't really know what it was. But now when I look back, right, on that version of me, I'm like, oh, I was doing public service, you know, when I was in middle school, when I was in high school, and I would go back to my middle school and talk to young people about, you know, what it's like in college. And that was kind of like, all of that was like my early, you know, thing with service. I was doing March of Dimes walks and all of those kinds of things, right? And so when I graduated from school and I started, my first job really was in nonprofit. My first professional job was in nonprofit. So I had early exposure to this idea of what it meant to serve vulnerable communities and those who had been marginalized and communities that we put at risk, not that are at risk, but that we put at risk because, you know, there are conditions that create that. And so when I, you know, spent some time and I was working on my doctorate, and then I was the executive director, I was the founding executive director of another nonprofit serving students in Baltimore County schools through the 100 Black Men of Maryland. And it's at that time that I met Adara Yera, and they were launching this board pipeline. And the whole goal of the program was to recruit, people who look like me, who were middle class, if I was even middle class at that time. But the bottom line is they were recruiting people who would never have an opportunity to serve in board leadership absent a program like Board Pipeline. And so we went through and we learned all the basics, and we kept getting, these opportunities to be with one another, to learn about board recruitment, board leadership, all of those things. And I have been, actively in boards since that time, and then chairing several since that time. And what I will tell you is that it is programs like ABC, it is programs like Board Pipeline that give us entry. And so one of the things that I see as my responsibility, right? So it wasn't just so I could be on a board or I could chair a board. It was so that I could create avenues for other people to do the same thing. So I'm always attending the regular meet and greets. I'm always trying to stay connected to what's happening with Board Pipeline. I see it as my role, like my responsibility, to make sure that I am bringing board pipeliners onto boards where I serve, and then helping to shepherd them into leadership. And so it is this idea of Sankofa. And so that is what you do, right? Once you get in, it's really not about you, it's about the opportunities you create for other people.
Anyone else want to share on that?
Oh, I would like to. I mean, Dr. Durant, you said your first job experience wasn't part of a nonprofit, and mine is too. Youth and Resources is technically my first job, but some strategies and resources that you can, try to help find Black candidates. I think just simple look into neighborhoods. And if you look into neighborhoods, you'll find the schools. And what else is everyone on? Everyone is on social media. You can go to social media. But, I just, something like that. And you did outreach, we do outreach actually, Youth and Resources. So we did this Back to School Festival not too long ago. And we got a lot of candidates. A lot of people filled out the application, to apply. And I was like, oh, this is great. Just go out and explore, and ask around. Basically what Youth and Resources did. And it's a fun thing to do. You get to meet new people, and then you get to meet potential board members. So simple answer for that question is just look into neighborhoods. Look into neighborhoods, you'll find schools. You can look at schools, and don't go to social media.
So what are some of the barriers that you have to convince people to overcome, or what are some of the pushback that you get from folks when you're talking to them?
Well,
Go right ahead. I was asking Lorraine, but please, Lorraine, then Terri.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
Well, barriers. Let's see. Since we look for mostly youth, so I don't know if they have barriers.
They're not as busy.
We kind of are busy, but we oh wait, you can get service learning hours for school, right. Persuade them. You can get this. You learn how to be a leader. You can help your hours for school. If you plan to go to college, this will look great on your resume.
Right.
Because I think you get a lot of benefits and you get a lot of experience, and you learn all this stuff. And I learned a lot of stuff. I've only been a part of Youth and Resources for a year, and I've learned a lot already, and I'm surprised I'm already chair. I'm impressed that I'm chair, and I think it's I already learned so much stuff, and being a part of a nonprofit board is very, very awesome. And in my terms, I think it's really cool, and that can help it can help other people too, other youth, if we go out and try to find more youth. Just give them the benefits. It's hey, this can help you with school, service learning out, stuff like that.
Cool. Terri. Sorry, Tracey.
No,
Dr. Durant.
Tracey's fine. I was gonna ask, I know Terri was trying to get in. I wanted to share something, but I wanted to, defer to Terri because I know you were trying to say something as well.
The only thing I was gonna say is that I do think sometimes a barrier can be time. I think that depending on the organizations and the individuals involved, that the timing of meetings, the timing of committees, the activities and what have you, have to be at a time that fits with people's real life schedules. So I think that can be a barrier. I think sometimes expense can be a barrier. If people have to travel to a meeting, or, you know, if you're asking them again to take a chunk of time out of their day, they may not be able to afford to take that chunk of time out of the day. And, you know, I think we just need to honor people's time. When you're asking people to give of themselves, what are we going to give back to them to facilitate their ability to be able to do the service? So I do think time can be sometimes a pretty big impediment.
So I'm glad that I waited for you to talk, because I think that one of the things, and this actually relates to a question that's in the chat or the Q&A, which is about why the socioeconomic piece around board pipeline. So I will certainly defer to you know, the experts and my colleagues at ABC to answer that from that perspective. But I will tell you, as a person who, when I first started board service, one, I was young, you know, I had a young family. So my income certainly was not, you know, what it is right now, to be clear, right? And so some of those boards that had give or get policies, or some of those boards that had fundraising components, I didn't have the social capital, and I certainly did not have the financial capital to be able to write a $10,000 check or a $50,000 check for a gala like some of my colleagues on the board. So one of the first boards that I served on, I think at the time I was the only person of color on the board. I was probably the youngest person on the board as well, and certainly did not have the financial resource. So we're planning our annual gala, and there's a report that comes out that shows how much money every board member has contributed. And when I'm talking about, you know, 5 figures with people, and I just did not have the ability to do that. Without something like board pipeline, I would have never been invited to serve on a board like that. And so I can't speak to if that's the reason why there's the requirement around board pipeline participation, but I can tell you this gives you the entry that you would otherwise not have. Now, what's interesting is that board that I'm talking about is the Chimes Foundation board, of which I am now chair. And I am the first Black woman to chair that board. Now, that says a lot. Without that board pipeline experience, and then I was a daily record leading woman, Diane Bell McCoy made the contact with the then president and CEO. We had a meeting that led to me serving on the board in a number of capacities and now being the chair. And I would venture to say my involvement with them has been good for the organization. And so I think that it's been mutually beneficial for us. But if not for the opportunity to get in the door the way that I did, we would have both not been able to benefit from this relationship that we now have.
Can you explain briefly what a give or get means?
So in some boards, there are, you know, there are requirements, right? In terms of some are dues, some are give or get. And so it's like, if we have a fundraising goal for the year, so let's say our fundraising goal, some of it is by individual board member and some of it is by collective board. So let's say the board has a $50,000, you know, fundraising goal. And that's important because when you're starting to talk about shepherding and your fiduciary responsibility, shepherding the organization's finances and your fiduciary responsibility, when you are going out to seek funds from like other philanthropic organizations, they want to know if you have 10 board members, you know, how many of these board members are believing in your mission and vision. You're asking us to give you money, but your board isn't even doing so. And so if, you know, you have like a gala and every board member is responsible for selling 5 tickets or whatever that ends up being. And so if you can't like write the check yourself, you know, who are you connected to so that money still comes into the organization? So in smaller nonprofits, maybe you're having a crab feast or something like that, and the board has a 50 ticket minimum. So if you divide it by 10, you're talking about 5 tickets per board member. Well, you know, when you think about the role of the board, for us, it doesn't always matter whether you sell your 5, you sell your 5, the board needs to sell 50. I don't really care where the 50 comes from. And so that's the idea of being able to pour into the organization. And for some people, that is going to be a barrier, just like time is a barrier. That's why you have to be real clear. When I'm asked to serve on boards, I'm asking things about what is the time commitment, because I'm also serving on multiple boards. Oh, and I have a full-time job. Oh, and I have a family to take care of. And so the thing that you don't want to do is to say that you will serve on a board and not be able to fully show up for that organization. So if you can't come to meetings like you're supposed to, if you don't have time, and your board service is not just the meeting, it's also the prep for the meeting. It is also, did you read the minutes? Did you read the executive director's report? Did you read the finances so that you come to the meeting with your questions, not trying to come up with the questions in the meeting? So all of that is time. If you're supposed to meet quarterly, are you managing the business of the organization so that you're only meeting quarterly and we're not meeting monthly? So there's these kinds of things that cause barrier, but certainly money can be one of them. Even small things like we're having a board annual meeting and it's at the Baltimore, Marriott waterfront, and parking is $26. If you don't have $26 to pay for parking, like they seem insignificant, but they are the things that cause people to not be able to serve on boards effectively.
I want to bring in one of our, and we'll have Q&A from the audience more generally at 11:55, but I want to bring in one question that I think is related to this that we got about just what are the pitfalls that, not from the side of the person trying to join the board, but the organization trying to recruit people. What are some of the pitfalls that they run into? They're legitimately trying to diversify their board, find an equitable thing to do, but it's hard, right? People are always complaining they can't find the right people. Where do they find these? I mean, what do they need to be doing differently? Is it just understanding that not everybody's going to be able to give $1,000 every year, or is there something deeper that they need to start about?
I'll take a stab at this. I do think that a part of it is looking at, okay, if we truly want to be committed to equity and inclusion, then what do we need to think about with regard to our board kind of policies that could potentially be preventing us from being able to be inclusive and provide equity when it comes to securing individuals who want to potentially be a part of the organization. The other thing is sometimes you just can't go to the easy answer. So you have to go deeper than, what I call the typical characters. I mean, I have
same
served,
Black people on every board.
Most of my experience in the nonprofit sector was in philanthropy. And it wasn't always a lot of us in philanthropy. And so you find the same few people on every board. Well, first off, as Dr. Durant just said, you can't be on every board because you don't have enough time, you don't have enough energy, you don't have enough focus. So you have to be able to go deeper than that. And I do think that those of us, frankly, who serve on boards have a responsibility to help people go deeper, that we don't just throw out what is, the usual suspect name. So what do your policies say that may be preventing people from being able to participate? And then how are you going about seeking out individuals to serve on the board? And again, we're not talking about one here and one there. We're talking about how we're going to make this board reflective of the community, right? So that requires us to do things and look at things a little differently. And let me just say this, because sometimes this is the big elephant. Yes, everybody is focused on, kind of racial and ethnic inclusion, but this issue of age is a big one. And I think that we must always put in front of ourselves that, time moves on. Therefore, the folks we invite to boards need to be younger and not always looking at, us boomers are like, we got our claws in and we're trying to hang on for dear life. But at some point, there comes a time when you begin to transition into different generations in a way that is thoughtful and get you to where you want to be in the future. And I think sometimes we can be a little short-sighted about that. Finally, I would say, while I have not been a part of ABC's pipeline program, I actually think I was working with Diane when the pipeline program was just being conceived. And I was working on a similar program in DC. And understanding,
we should mention that you were the executive director of
I was the president of the Community
DC,
Foundation
right?
in DC for 18 years. Um, and, but there's this mutual benefit, right, between the individuals who are seeking board service and the organizations that need board members. And so I think that we have to make sure that we are working that mutual benefit to the benefit of both parties.
Tracey, would you add anything to
that? Nope.
All right, I heard that. So what are the big needs for boards right now? What do they need from us? Like, more than we said, that it's not just being checking the box that we showed up. What do they need us to bring them? What are we doing that is more valuable than the check that other people may be writing?
Yeah,
well,
so
go ahead, Tracey.
So, I think, it's just not possible for me to be here and not talk from the seat that I'm in, and all that is happening around us. I think Terri has mentioned it a couple of times, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. And I mean, depending on who you're talking to, you're going to get something different. I think that one of the reasons there's a need for nonprofits is because of the ways that people are not included, right? I think that this idea of what it really is going to take for us to solve the ills of, our community really means that we're going to have to lean in ways that we have not done so before. I think that ABC, for as long as I have been in a relationship with them, have talked about this idea of the ways that structural deficit and structural inequality, systemic racism, like all of these things, how they plague our most vulnerable communities. And I think for boards today, especially right now, you can get really distracted and not be paying attention to how all of these things are really a manifestation and a more sophisticated strand of a virus. And I'm not even talking about COVID, right, or the Delta variant. I'm talking about what has plagued our communities for a very long time. Take COVID, for example, right? What's interesting to me, and I say this all the time when I'm talking to people, especially from the educational sector, right? God bless anybody who's in education right now. Let me just say that, because it has been a very difficult time. Here's what's interesting, or maybe not. In Baltimore City in particular, we fed a lot of people when the shelter in place was first called, when things kind of shut down. We fed families, neighborhood, anybody who came, we fed them. Here's what's interesting about that. Those people didn't become hungry because of COVID.
Right.
They were hungry before COVID. What we went through in terms of technology, like the fact that Zoom exists in the way that it does now, and it did not before. Everything from laptops to broadband service to all of these things, right, that were exacerbated because of the pandemic. Not because of the pandemic, they were exacerbated, which means people were living in these circumstances and these conditions prior to COVID. And so the question for all of us, especially in nonprofit, is like, what's our real role?
Right.
Were these things known to us? If they weren't known to us, why weren't they known to us? If they were known to us, what were we doing? What should we be doing about them? How do we really get our fingers on the pulse of what is impacting our communities, what is plaguing our communities, what is preventing us from having the kind of outcomes that we want? And we can't be distracted in this moment. That's the thing for me right now. And this is what I'm saying to all of my boards. Some of the things that we are wrestling with right now, they existed pre-COVID. So the question for us is, how do we stay focused on triaging the situation we're in now, but then also doing the real work that is about interrogating what existed before and who boards are going to need to be, who organizations are going to need to be from here. We will not go back to what it was. And you know what? There's probably some benefit in that. But our ability to really see what our work is. It's going to change our vision. It's going to change our missions. It should actually. It's going to change our key actions. It's going to change our strategic planning. All of these things give us this opportunity, right? That I think is pregnant with possibility for us to continue to do the work that is about why we started in the first place, but only if we're open to really telling the truth. And I just don't want, if you don't remember anything else from today, don't be distracted. COVID is a thing. Delta variant is a thing. We are still in a pandemic. All of these things are real. They are legitimate things for us to worry about. But do not be, let me say it a little bit differently. Don't get it twisted, right? This stuff existed before all of this. And so you can convince yourself that all it is, we have all this extra funding, we have all of this stuff coming in, seemingly this should make things better. Let me tell you something. When you put more resources in communities that have been historically marginalized, that have been historically oppressed, when you put more resources in those communities and nothing changes in the communities, the people become the problem. It doesn't become about the systems, the structures, our ability in those spaces. It becomes about, look, see these people, that's what it becomes about. And so we can't let that be the narrative. And so we got to get real clear about what is really at issue and how we do the very real work that is ours to do about interrogating those things and then disrupting, dismantling those systems and creating new ones that really allow us to serve who we are intending to serve.
So let me ask something for all of you to kind of add to that a little bit. So I most of my career, I've been in DC, and I came and I first worked in Baltimore 4 or 5 years ago, right after the uprisings, right? A lot of resources came into the city, then it kind of died down. Then there's, the Floyd, the resources are coming back. Sooner or later, they probably will die down too. So where is a board, like as a board member, what's the responsibility that we have to, we have this light that's shining in, but it's also a light that's exposing some of the depth of the problems, right, that we didn't necessarily create. So how do we, I guess what I'm asking is a variation on kind of what you just talked about, but I really want to get a little bit deeper into, is there a risk in taking on too much as a board member? Because these resources have nothing to do with you. They have to do with the circumstances in our society. But now you're around as a board member when this is going on. How do you take advantage of all of that without burning yourself out? I mean, in a sense, there's a way of taking what you just said to say that, well, we're going to solve all these problems, right? Is that really the job? Because you said something very deep that I love, ours to work on. So where is the balance in there?
From a board perspective, and especially given what Tracey was just speaking of, because she's absolutely right, there's nothing new here. There's nothing new. And in fact, we know the schools have been feeding kids long before COVID. We knew that many kids got breakfast and lunch. And on the weekends, sometimes they got their food for the weekends from the schools. We've known that. I think a part of this, honestly, gets to the unfortunate model of capitalization that we have for nonprofit organizations. When you have to rely on other people and the kindness of their heart to provide you with the funding that you need, when people aren't recognizing that the service you are providing is a necessary and needed service for communities to thrive, it shouldn't be seen as a handout or as charity. This is a necessary stream of revenue that needs to be transpiring from whomever the funding entities are to the nonprofit organizations. And I do think it's really important that board members in support of the staffs of their organizations are helping not just build relationships, but helping develop the narrative to these funding agencies that says, trust me, we know what we are doing. All of these limitations, all these rules, all these requirements, all these reporting standards that you put on these grants limit our ability to be able to do the work that we need to do, because frankly, we got to use some of this money to deal with all of your requirements.
Right.
And I think that, and I feel like I can say this, having worked in funding entities for so long, that philanthropy, and I'm going to give philanthropy some credit, because philanthropy has begun to accept the fact that some of the issues that we have in community with nonprofits being able to do their work is because of philanthropy. And
Right.
how philanthropy has structured what it is they provide to nonprofit organizations. I think we who are sitting in the seat of nonprofits have to continue to push to help people understand that this work that we do is not something that's extra and on the side. The work that we do is real work that helps community function, because if we didn't exist, municipal services don't provide everything that's needed. State services don't provide everything that's needed. And federal services certainly don't provide everything that's needed. So I remind people, nonprofit is a tax status. That's it. That's all that nonprofit means. It doesn't mean that we do any less work. In fact, it means we do more. And we do it with less resource. So I think it's so important that staff and board alike push this narrative and understand that, yes, money has power, but without the service that you provide, that donor, that funder cannot implement their mission. So who's got some power? Those people who sit in the nonprofit space have power, and we have to be willing to utilize it.
So what's the risk to doing that? I mean,
the risk to doing that is sometimes you might not get the grant.
Right.
And
okay.
Sometimes you don't want it.
And sometimes you don't want it. My husband has a saying that sometimes the juice ain't worth the squeeze. Yeah, and so you have to say sometimes, this is what we do. We do children and families. No, we don't do animals. Right. We do children and families up to age 25. We don't do seniors. Right. And there's no harm in doing it, because somebody else does animals and somebody else does seniors. And I think, and I know I'm talking too long and I'm going to shut up.
No, actually, we believe it or not, we are ahead of schedule, so flow.
Nonprofit organizations should not be competing against each other.
That's right.
Right? We should be working together to ensure that all of these issues, all of these ills, all of these things that need additional work and support, that we are dividing up these things in a way where each of us can work to the best of our ability and contribute to what it is that we can contribute. I used to tell nonprofits all the time, please do not get into the business of mission creep, because you can't sustain it. So if you work with children, work with children. I'm sorry?
Explain what that is for folks who may not be.
Mission creep is when you are a youth serving organization, but there's a grant out there that says, well, if you can just work with seniors who, then you can get some money. But that's not what you do. You work with youth. And so you have to work within your mission, stay in your lane. And my final comment is, and we would be better able to do that if we had better communication amongst our own sector and had opportunities to coalesce and talk about how we are contributing in the particular areas that we are trying to serve. And I always believe that our voices are stronger when they are a collective than when they are individual voices, as it comes to changing some of these policies and systems that we have to operate within.
And that's why and that goes back to the conversation we had earlier about board leadership, right? The conversation about mission creep, all of these things are back to the idea of board leadership, because part of and I'll speak as a board chair, right? Part of my role as the board chair, one, is to support the executive director. Like that's my whole job. My whole job, because the board has one employee. If you are a nonprofit that has a staff, the board has one employee, and that's the ED, president, CEO, ED. And so my sole job is to make sure that that person has what they need to do the job that we've asked them to do. Part of that also means, so one of the EDs that I have the pleasure of working with at Child First, Danesta Hunt, one of the things when Danesta and I are doing our check-ins as we're getting ready for board meetings and we're talking about, you know, the work of the organization and what's happening, one of the things that we do really well together is we talk about, like, is this related to what we are trying to do? And I will tell you, as we have grown and strengthened not just the relationship between us, but the relationship between board and the organization, and really focusing on our mission, our strategic planning work, all of that, one of the things that has become really evident to us recently is even in how we're writing some of our grants, right? So we're on this journey around, you know, equity and anti-racism. But here's what happens, and Terri, I know, appreciates this. You know, some of our, you know, funding partners, right? Some of the philanthropic organizations actually require you to write these grants in such a way that is actually forces you to use language that's dehumanizing to the populations that you're trying to serve. And so there's this moment that you have when you're trying to figure out who we really are trying to be as an organization. And if I write this grant in this way that is about dehumanization, that really is counter to me trying to be an anti-racist organization, for example. And so we had to make a decision. We're going to write this grant the way that we want to write it, which is about honoring people and their humanity, which is what Terri said earlier, right? We're going to write it in this way. And you know what that might mean? It might mean we might not get that grant. And you know what? That's okay. Because until we kind of got to shepherd our philanthropic partners into being different so that we can all be different. One of the things that happens in my private work is I work with funders, I work with organizations all the time, and they say to us, you know, we really want to have our grantees be more around, you know, do more work around equity. We want to have them do more work around, you know, DEI. We want to have them do more work around anti-racism. My question always is, how much work has the foundation done? Because if the foundation hasn't done any work yet, I don't think you should be requiring your grantees to do anything, because you won't even know what it looks like when they get it right. And so until you try to, you know, before you try to push people out there to do something, how about you in here with your own board, you talk about what your priorities are, you talk about what it means for you to be a more inclusive organization. How about you do that work here first? And then we can talk about what the grantees need to do. That's why you need strong board leadership. You need strong board leadership, because strong board leadership helps you to stay focused on that thing. Because having been an executive director of a nonprofit, when I was an executive director of a nonprofit, there were times when I paid my staff and did not pay myself. There were times when if the health benefits were going to get cut.
And it's worth mentioning,
you know,
that's very common for Black EDs in particular,
it's
right?
Very common for Black EDs, right? And so, and I was a young ED and whatever. And I remember having to call my husband saying, you know, you need to put us on your insurance because this insurance, it was all kinds of stuff. And I did that. I carried that weight on my back all the time as a young ED of a nonprofit. That should never be the case, but that is often always the case. And that's the part that no one tells you. Right? That's the stuff that no one tells you, especially when you are, I can't talk about being anybody other than who I am. As a Black woman ED, that was what I had to do. And so there were times when I had to sacrifice. And so if someone came to Terri's point and said, hey, this is what you do, but if you add this component, we'll give you this extra money. That was real attractive to me. That was really seductive to me, because I'm like, oh, I can pay my bills. I can do this. I can do that. You know, so it becomes really easy to do that, which again is why board leadership matters and trusting board leadership. My mom used to say, every dollar ain't one you should get. And when you are young in an organization and you're just trying to keep things moving because you're trying to do this work of service, you don't even think about that. It's about how much can I get to do the work, because sometimes we are scraping the bottom for the ability just to do the work. That should not be the case. That should not be the case. And here's how you know why systemic inequities work the way that they do. Because if the systems were really designed for the most vulnerable of us, they would work together differently. they would work together better. There would not be a reason for nonprofits to have to compete, because there actually is so much work to do. Like, there's a lot of work to do. But when we're put against each other, then it does become a competition. And guess what? No real work happens like that. No real work happens like that. And what I will tell you, what I know about, to Terri's point about this idea of moving on. Now, certainly, Terri says, she's the oldest person. I'm not as young as Lorraine. And here's what I will tell you. Even I recognize that I've got to make space, and I've got to move out of the way for people that have different thought processes, for people who see the world different. One of the things, I heard someone years and years and years ago say, technology is only technology to those of us that were born before technology. Babies come out the womb knowing how to unlock a phone. Like they, I thought I've become a dinosaur with my phone. My mother used to say, help me do this on my phone. Now I'm doing that with my own children. Now, okay, I'm not that old, y'all. Like I ain't old enough to be asking somebody to help me with my phone, but it's a thing. So there's some things that I don't know about how the world is moving and is functioning. So I've got to make space. And whenever I am having discomfort or difficulty with moving out of the way, what I do is I lean in more, because what it tells me is that that's a growing space for me. That's a learning space for me. And young people get that right. So like organizations like Youth as Resource, they get that right. They understand how to, bring all of these things together. And so we can benefit from the depth. And so one of the things is, in terms of the organizations and the nonprofit work, it's not about how much you do, it's about how deep you go, right? It is about being able to sustain, because that way it doesn't matter if Lorraine is the chair or Terri's the president or Tracey's in whatever role. It doesn't matter, because if we go deep enough, it just becomes a part of how things are. And it's not dependent on the person, it's dependent on the system.
Well, I mean, Lorraine, please jump
yes,
in.
please. I want to talk about how what Ms. Terri and Dr. Durant said earlier about now I forgot. Oh, Ms. Terri, you talked about what did you? And now I'm forgetting because I'm like this, like your conversation. Like I was so intrigued about it. So we have policies, we have guidelines that we fund. Like of course we're youth, so we're going to fund youth. We're not going to fund seniors, like you said, because there's most likely a nonprofit organization that does that. We fund long projects that have that talks about community issues and helps with community problems. And we won't fund someone who only is like a one-time event, and it's like maybe they don't seem that important, quotation marks, but like we fund people we fund youth who are interested in trying to help community issues, because we live in this community and we are in that community, because that's what Youth as Resources is. We are the youth, and we help the youth. And what you, Mr. Terrill, says, like how we don't get burned out. We have a task force committee, and we have issues that we work on. I could name them. I should name them. So mental health, school police accountability, school climate, youth homelessness, and disability awareness. Those are 5 issues. And we could add more in like the next physical year if we wish, but those are the 5 that we always focused on, so we don't get burned out, because we have board members who have other time commitments. Like we said, time is a barrier, and like school's about to start. I'm gonna be in high school next week. I mean, a junior next week, and
congratulations.
And other people have college, so we you gotta so we can't have it so many issues on our issue agenda that we focus on when some other people have other things to do. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add on.
No, that's y'all are brilliant. I'm sitting having a great time.
Can I just one thing? There's a comment here that says inclusion does not mean moving out of the way. It means joining together, working together. Elders are not obsolete, no more than young or useless. Absolutely, I agree. But there is a point where you have to provide the space for other people to lead. And I do think that oftentimes, as we get older, it becomes sometimes difficult for us to recognize that, yes, we've got experience, but so do other people, right? And sometimes that experience that other people, younger people have, can sometimes almost be more relevant because of where we are. Does not mean that those who are older are obsolete. We certainly have a lot to contribute, but I often look at my role now as one that is a guiding role, not a directing role, but a guiding role. So if I can help somebody figure out how they can do it without telling them how to do it, I think that that's the appropriate role for those people who have incredible wisdom, incredible experience, but they learned that some way.
Right. Well, so let me start sharing some of the questions we've gotten from the audience, and feel free to react as you want to. You don't have to necessarily answer every question. What should white allies on boards and in staff leadership positions not do? I.e., how do white allies end up hindering DEI progress? So what do we tell our friends here that are our co-conspirators?
We definitely talked about this earlier, and you know how, don't have us like you have us in the table, like great, we in the seat, we're in the table, but like please allow us to talk. Like don't like tokenism, don't treat us as a trophy just in a case and never to be brought out unless to, something like that. Like that's what they should not do. Just don't treat us as a trophy. If trying to get people of color on the board, let us talk, let us share our experience, let us help you, help us help you. Try to have us participate in the organization as well. And don't try to push us back like so we can just be gazed upon from the outside looking in. It's like, oh my God, look how diverse you are. But then they don't know that, you're not letting the people that you hired, so the people that you brought onto the board, so you can seem diverse, even though you don't let them participate in helping the board.
Yes. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so I should probably not be the person answering this question because I could take the rest of the time. The one thing that I would say is people got to do their own work. And I think that's true for white allies, it's true for people of color, because one of the things about all of this, right? One of the things about our collective healing, our collective humanity, is about the recognition that we've all been harmed by systems of oppression. Everybody's been harmed by systems of oppression. And so there is work that people of color have to do. The question was about white allies, so I'll go there, but let me be clear that people of color have to do work too. And I will tell you that I heard someone many months ago at this point say something like, the most dangerous people are people who have somehow made it out. So, right, as a person who grew up, I often say, I didn't really know I was poor, because when you're poor and everybody else is around you poor, you don't know that you're poor. And, poor did not mean not clean. It didn't mean that I was hungry. I mean, my mom worked, 2-3 jobs. She was always going to school, taking classes to better her skills, right? She did all of those things, not just to take care of me, but she took care of a whole lot of people, but we were still poor. And one of the things that happens is when that is no longer your circumstance, you somehow forget, what it means to be in those conditions, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you get out, so to speak, or when you come up, whatever language you want to use, what happens is you then look at people who that is their current condition, and you have all of this advice about what they should do. You have all of these thoughts and all of these perspectives, and it just removes you. It makes you further away from everyone else. But you got to know what that means. So you got to do your own personal work. For white allies, for white people, you got to understand that you have also been harmed by systemic oppression. You have to understand that there are ways that we are all complicit in the outcomes that we're getting. You got to also recognize that even if you are in proximity to someone who is of color, right, you are not of color. It's not an experience you have. So the best thing that you can do for me if we're in relationship is you can believe me when I tell you a thing is a thing. And all of the time, that is really difficult, because I wake up and I'm fully aware that I'm a Black woman before my feet hit the floor in the morning, right? There are ways that I move through the world every day. There are gymnastics that I have to, do in my head, mentally every day to be in this body. And there are some people who that is not their circumstance. It is not their conditioning. And so you don't understand that the best thing you can do is to lean in and do your own work. Now, I'll share the name of the book that my partners and I have coming out in a little bit. But what I will tell you is we talk a lot about humanity, but we don't talk about dehumanization. So you can't talk about one thing without the other. And there are ways that if we are partners on a board and I say a thing, and then you and no one responds, right? I've been in board meetings and I've said something and nobody responds. And I'm like, I know I said it because I just heard me when I said it, right? And then a white person will come behind me and say the very same thing. And then everybody will respond as if it was the first time that they heard it. So what I need you, white ally, to do is I need you to recognize that happened. See, but you can't interrupt something you can't see. That's why you got to do your own work. So I need you to see that happened. And I need you to be the person that says, I'm sorry, can we pause for a moment? How is what Sheila said different from what Dr. Durant just said? Or I need you to recognize, like Terri graciously, called me Dr. Durant. I need you to recognize how every white person in this meeting is Dr. and I'm Tracey. I need you to call it out. Because see, I get exhausted calling it out. So if you want to be an ally, I need you to take some of this from me, because it is exhausting to constantly have to be. And I don't go around saying I'm Dr. Durant. My mama named me Tracey. I'm real comfortable in my skin. My ego is intact. But if everybody else who has a credential is called by their credential and I am not, I need somebody else in the room to see that. Those are the things that I need white allies to do. I need you to see the things without me telling you, and I need you to use your voice before I have to say a thing. That's what I need you to do for me.
So does everybody have to be comfortable with kind of policing this stuff? I mean, because you just said, like, it's exhausting. So, I mean, where's
the more muscle you have, right? If there are more people doing it, it's not as exhausting. See, here's what I know. If I show up in the meeting now with Lorraine and Terri, like, I'm pretty confident that they're gonna have my back and I'm gonna have theirs. Like, so it don't have to just feel like it's me anymore. Like, I got two other people that's got my side, that's got my back. We flanking each other, right? If more people do that, it would feel less burdensome on individual people. But white ally, because you hold power in the room just by your presence. I need you to understand how that works, and I need you to do your work so that I'm not having to work so hard all the time.
So let me, this is a
can
question.
I just add that happens also, it's not just always the race thing, but the gender thing. And when, men don't recognize when women are speaking, it becomes a really, really difficult path to walk. And so allies, in whatever form they come in, white allies, male allies, as Tracey says, you need to show up for the folk that you say you are allies of. And I like to think allies are nice, accomplices are better. I need you to know that you're gonna go down for me as an accomplice because you believe in what the cause is and what the issues are. And we do need to all be more conscious of that issue that she brings up of, I think I just said that, and now so-and-so said it, and now it matters.
Right.
It's a very, very real situation.
And go ahead, Lorraine.
No, it was a short thing. It was a quick thing. As you said, it's also a race thing. It's also a gender thing. It's also an age thing as well. I'm not gonna lie, it is. Because I remember when we go out and like have meetings with other organizations, and maybe they're a little older than us, I've noticed sometimes they don't want us to talk, or they don't let us talk, or they don't listen to us. Like that definitely happened to me us in one meeting, and I forgot what it was about, but it was definitely an age thing. Age is also a part of it too. It's like three things: race, gender, and age. It's so confusing how that has to be something that has to be talked about, and when it shouldn't, because it should be already necessary. Like, just listen to people, please.
Yeah.
So then how do we, I just want to get through some of the questions. So how do we then remove those roadblocks?
Well, so two things I want to say, and I think it connects to your question a bit. Someone in the chat just put, something like call people out. I want to be real clear that I think that even when we talk about humanity, the idea of calling people out is something I would have us complicate our thinking around. I think it's calling people in, because part of what happens is when you call me out, you put me on the defense. Like if you push me in a corner, like I'm coming out swinging, right? And so this idea of calling people in, this idea of helping people, that's why you got to do your own work, this idea of calling people and centering them. Part of what happens, and it speaks to Lorraine's point, I think a bit, and what Terri said earlier about what happens when you make space for other people. What happens is there's a loss of power, or there's a loss of perceived power. And so that is difficult for people, especially when you feel like you've had to fight so hard to get power. The idea that I've got to give it away, or I've got to like move out of the way so that other people can have space, can be really challenging for folks. And so that's why the age thing, I think, plays out. I actually had that similar experience. Actually, when I met Diane very early in the board pipeline experience, we were in a meeting, in a conversation, and I remember saying to her, somebody in the room was talking about, well, young people don't have voice because young people, haven't paid their dues yet. And I remember, and I had just met Diane, and I pulled her aside and I said, well, can you explain to me what that means? Can you just explain to me what paying my dues means? Because I'm here, like I'm working in nonprofit, I'm doing the work, like what else I gotta do? Like, and I'm your dividend. Like I am the thing that y'all sitting up here talking about you've been working for. Like I'm the person who, based on my history, I'm the person who has benefited from nonprofits and what they do. So like I'm what you got. So if I'm not enough, like what you looking for? And I remember her pulling me into a meeting and with other folks, and she said, well, Tracey, can you repeat what you just said? And I was like, no, I wouldn't have never said it if I knew you was going to have me repeat it in front of all these people. But the point is this idea of making the space, it means really listening. Part of the things that sometimes becomes really difficult is listening in a way that allows you to hear what people are saying, even if it's not how you're used to hearing it. Like people shouldn't have to show up a particular kind of way. They shouldn't have to talk a certain kind of way. It really is about wishing we were better and not that it was easier. And so the way you like remove those barriers is that you got to kind of ask, like, I need to pick up the phone and call Lorraine and say, okay, we're having this conversation, or we keep having this discussion, and people keep saying the same thing and I'm just not hearing it. Like, I need you to help me. I need you to help me translate for me what I'm not hearing, because we keep going back. And that happens a lot when I'm working with youth organizations or when I'm working with other people. People get into defense. I'm working hard. I'm doing this. I'm working for the kids. I'm here early. I'm here late. Okay, none of that matters because they are not experiencing us the way that we think they are. So what ability do we need to have to hear them differently? You got to go ask the people, and then you got to be willing, if the relationship is important enough, you got to be willing to invest in you doing something different. It's not about them. It's always about you. It is, whenever I am really challenged with dealing with someone, it's an indication that there's some work that Tracey needs to do personally.
So let me add, there was one last line of that person's question that I didn't say that I think actually is apropos now. What are the tangible ways to push without being offensive? And I would add to that, does it matter? Like, because it sounds like what you're saying is that the key is to work on yourself, but what is it when you're dealing with others? How do you do it well?
I'm going to answer this one real quickly, and then I'm going to go to Terri and Lorraine. So one of the things that I will tell you, that's why I have said like probably 10 times at this point, you got to do your own personal work. See, whenever I'm having difficult conversations or pushing people or trying not to be offensive, part of it is, so there's a quote that I've kind of coined, and it's actually part of the title of our book.
You should say the name of the book so we can put it in the chat.
So the book is called Humanity Over Comfort. It's how you confront systemic racism. And part of what that comes from is a conversation I was having with a colleague, actually a white colleague. It was a difficult conversation. And I said to the person, I am not prioritizing your comfort over my humanity. Right? Because when you do that, a piece of your soul dies every day. Like that's what happens. And so for me, it's never about Terri, you did a thing to me. Lorraine, you did a thing to me. I'm always coming from a place of, we had this interaction. Here's how I experienced it. And I need to relate to you what happened for me. Like, that's it. That's it. And so it doesn't become about blaming you, problematizing you, you're a bad person. Because the minute you call somebody a bad person, I can do a bad thing and still be a good person, right?
Yep.
So it never becomes about the other person. It always becomes about here's how I experienced it. And if you hurt me, if the relationship is important, if you hurt me and I'm telling you it hurt me, then we reconcile what that was. It's like someone steps on your toe. If you step on my toe, even if you didn't mean it, my toe still hurts. So your apology doesn't take anything away from you. I'm telling you how I experienced it. Part of what happens is and that's why I said be very careful about the calling people out. If you did not intend for this to land on me this way, and now I am telling you, this is how the interaction impacted me, this is how it affected me, then we move on from there. If you meant it, then you meant it, and we can just move on from that. Like, people show you who they are, believe them the first time, there's a thing. So, but I think the way that you get out of being offensive is it's not about you are a bad person. It's about this is an experience we had and this is how it impacted me. And that happens on boards all the time. I've had to have some very difficult conversations with other board members, with other board colleagues, with EDs around things that have happened. But when at the core of that is this idea of our collective humanity, and at the core of that is this idea of trusting relationships. Brene Brown does a lot around the anatomy of trust. Like if you haven't read her work, if you haven't looked at it, I strongly encourage you to look at the anatomy of trust. It is the foundation for, all successful working relationships on board. So I would say it has to be about what's happening for you, not about the other person being bad, because then that becomes a whole different kind of thing to negotiate.
Gotcha.
I think comfort is overrated and discomfort is underrated. Nobody ever grew from any circumstance or situation where they were in total comfort. If you in total comfort, there's no need to grow, right? All is good. And so we have to be okay with experience, and it doesn't feel good. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable, but if you can keep an open mind, and if you can keep your ears open, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. If you can keep your ears open and really listen, not just hear people, but really listen, then sometimes you can be able to discern better and ask the right types of questions to get the clarity that you need. So I do think that discomfort is something that we all need to be okay with and understand that our growth hinges on our ability to be uncomfortable and to move beyond that. The other thing I just want to say is that people used to tell me all the time, well, Terri, dialogue is not action. And I totally disagree. I think dialogue is the foundation for action, and that it is only through our ability to communicate with each other that we are able to then create the actions that need to take place. Human communication becomes the basis for almost everything that we do. So we got to do it better. We've got to stop being in positions where we are kind of formulating what we're going to say before you finish talking about what you're saying. And I think that happens so often. I think it really happens a lot in board meetings, that board members have a position and they're not listening to you defend your position because they're so focused on what their position is and ready to, come at you about, well, wait a minute, no, that doesn't make sense because. And I think, again, it's just this total lack of appreciation for discomfort, but also this kind of me kind of attitude around what my role is on the board versus what your role is on the board. And the board is a collective body. And so we have to understand that we should be operating as a collective body, understanding that there are different members in the body, different members, different opinions, different thoughts, but we all come together to figure out how we're going to move forward to the benefit of the body.
And communication, respect, and listening are wonderful things that a lot of people don't know how to do. Right? So, how Dr. Durant was talking about, if you step on my toe and stuff, like if you didn't mean it, then great. I mean, not great, but like step to the side and like have like a civilized conversation, like how you hurt me, of how like let me educate you what you just did and how that was wrong, and move on. Now, if they did mean it, that's up to you how you want to move on to that, if it's offensive or not. So it's like, no. But that's how I like, that's what I wanted to just add on. It's like, okay, like communicate first. Like communication is a great thing. Dialogue, how Mr. Terry said, it's great for action. You know, talk to people, talk and like have a actual conversation, and like don't interrupt each other while talking. So you can listen, use your 2 ears that you have, listen and talk about it, and then, you know, maybe you can like stand on common ground and move on, and just don't have any bad blood type of thing. But yeah, that's what I want to add.
Cool. So we have a couple more questions and only a couple more minutes. So I just want to get them out in response to whatever you feel works here. How can nonprofit leaders facilitate the process of the board coming together as a collective unit? How strong is the influence of donors on board decisions? Is it even a substantive issue? And a question about the many startup models that exist. Are startup and similar entrepreneurs sought after as board members? Please feel free to take any piece of that.
Really quickly, let me just put a plug in addition to the resources that ABC provides for boards, for Board Source, which I serve on the board of, and the direction that we are moving in is a focus on what we call purpose-driven leadership. And I would encourage anyone who has not to read the article, which is titled Purpose-Driven Leadership, that talks, it goes even deeper than your mission, because sometimes
is this Rick Warren's thing, or is
excuse me?
The Rick Warren book, or is this something?
No, this is, well, this article that I'm speaking of was actually written by the CEO of Board Source, Ann Wallace. Okay. But there are several on this whole issue of purpose-driven leadership and how you apply that in a board so that the organizations are truly meeting a purpose, not just the mission that they have defined for themselves. So I would encourage people to utilize some of the resources that are through Board Source to help boards get to where they need to be. But I do think that boards, sometimes we get so focused on, you know, the votes and making the decisions that we don't spend enough time in board meetings doing true board development, having the iterative conversations that help us move our strategies along. And I think it's really important to carve that time out in board meetings. Yes, you got to do the business of the board, but how do we want to move forward? What is it that we really want to? So it's almost like there's a portion of almost every board meeting that needs to have a visioning component, something that really allows you to get out of this very moment and look down the road a piece, to develop the organization and develop the organization together between the board and as Dr. Durant said, your one staff person, which is your CEO, right. And that you all are walking together on this path and not anybody going kind of solo.
You know, and Terry, thank you for it. So I read that article. It's March 10th article.
We put the link in the chat, by the way.
And there's the idea of like purpose before organization. And so one of the things, to your point, is yes, there's the business of the organization. And I think you have to almost always come back to like, and why are we doing this? And why does it matter? And why do we have to do it this way? And that article does a really good job of talking about that. You know, who has voice, who has power. There's some really some key things. And I think that in order for boards, you said coalesce earlier, in order for boards to cohere and make sure that we are on the same page, you know, we do the fighting in the boardroom. When we walk out of here, you know, we got one voice, we got one thing that we're saying. And so we've all got to agree to that. And if we stay focused on what is our real purpose and what are we really trying to do, it helps to ground all of us. Even when there's difference of opinion, there's different of perspective, we all have different lived experiences. So we're going to approach things in a lot of different ways. But when we are centering the people that we're serving, when we're centering that purpose, it really does help us to stay, you know, moving towards our North Star, if you will, and making sure that we achieve our mission.
Lorraine, you want to close this out?
I can if you repeat the question.
Oh, so there were several. One was, well, how can nonprofit leaders help board members come together as a collective group? Another was do donors, about how much do donors actually influence the decisions of boards, and is that really a problem? And looking to the startups and entrepreneurs for potential board members, is that a thing that we should be doing? Any piece of it, you have to talk about all of it.
No worries. So I think donors, I'm not donors, well, when we apply to grants, so they do have impact. I was about to talk about something that I'm not allowed to talk about. So I'm going to.
Well, then cut off that. Don't worry, we'll cut it out.
But I remember it was long before, but we increased our grants up to 5,000. But this is completely different. It's not donors, but this is when we was giving grants. But didn't we increase our grant up to 5,000 for someone who applied to our grant? Why did we increase our grant up to 5,000?
Why did we?
Yes.
All right.
We had money.
Oh yeah, because we have money. So yeah, because we have money, so we increased our grant up. So yeah, we do talk about donors a lot. And when we apply to grants and we get that money, that helps a lot. And that talks about how we can change what we can talk about and what we can do as a like that broad is like, oh wait, we have all this money now, we can do more, and we help the community out more. So yes, donors, and when we apply grants and stuff, that does help, and that does help with board decisions, because we increased our grants to 5,000. It wasn't 5,000 before, but we got more money from other grants that we received, and look, we can help the community out more so
may I ask you as we close, do you feel that for you, because it was clear from our other speakers that it's a kind of an ongoing war, right? Are dealing with donors and educating them on what it is, how to do it right. Do you feel like you're in that position too, or do you feel like donors typically come to you kind of understanding your power, or what? How would you feel?
No, I don't feel that way. I think they understand us.
Wow. Cool.
I think they understand us. From my point of view, I think that.
Fantastic. Well, so we are running up on time, so let me pass it over to Tiffany to close us out and tell us about next steps.
Thank you. Thank you. Such a powerful discussion. I want to thank you all for joining us today. It is my hope that you all gain some tools and some understanding today to continue to truly change the landscape of the nonprofit sector to achieve racial equity, and to take from our panel today for the unheard voices, for the only voices, for communities and for people of color. I want to share as I close that for ABC, one of the impact outcomes for us is that Black people will have the knowledge and tools and support to survive and thrive in their workplaces, despite systemic and race-based barriers. And so as a call to action within your level of influence for our audience, from what we heard from our moderator and our panel, that this change starts with organizations, boards, culture, practices, and policies. And so we really should, I hope you gained some insightful information today in order to go back to your organizations, go back to where you can have influence in order to make and start those changes or continue those changes. I also want to thank my co-creator of this convening, John Law, and I want to thank the attendees who chose to make donations when they registered. If you still want to donate, the link should be in the chat box now, and your donations are what make these convenings possible, so thank you. And lastly, if you're Black or you're a non-Black person of color and you are interested in applying for Board Pipeline Leadership Development Program, please email John Law or visit ABC's website for more information. And as a reminder, the applications will be closed this upcoming Tuesday, August the 31st. And so thank you to Terrill, Terri, Tracey, and Lorraine for your time today. Thank you for our audience. And we will see you soon for our next webinar. Thank you.